Jack's RPG Podcast. I'm in Max. Pursuing the RPG hobby with reckless abandon.
Games on Demand is going crazy too.
Why, hello, and welcome to Season 25, Episode 2 of Happy Jack's RPG Podcast. My name is Stu.
My name is Jim.
I'm Stork.
And we've got a game convention coming up.
This guy's like runs.
August 30th and 31st and September 1st and 2nd at the LAX Hilton Hotel, strategicon.net. We'll talk about that after the first email.
Right on.
In this episode, Joe from the Imperium in Landis.
Way to try.
I came up with that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thought you tried to put like a bow on a hog.
Writes in about depth and immersion. Nicholas asks, am I a necromancer? And Tia Matinen writes in on a sundry of topics. But first, if you'd like to email us, you can email us at happyjacksrpg@gmail.com. That's happyjacksrpg@gmail.com. We have a forum, happyjacksforum.com, and then we're also on all the social meteors. We're on the Facebook and the Twitter and the Instagram and the MeWe, happyjacksrpg, all one word. And if you'd like to watch the show live, go to happyjacks.org/live on Fridays at 7 p.m. Pacific time, and you can watch us and see our face is.
Yes.
That's not the biggest selling point.
We just omit that. We edit that.
There are better looking people on other podcasts, I guess.
There's better looking people in this podcast, just not in this room right now.
That's true.
Yes. Yeah. This is a challenged room when it comes to chiseled good looks.
Yes. I know. You get the fat old bearded guys. This is what you get, people.
You don't get chiseled. You don't get look. You get looks, but you don't get good.
Yeah.
Well, glares. You get glares. You don't get looks. Depth and immersion from Joe in Imperium in Landis. Jackers. The other day I was watching The Nutcracker and the Four Realms. It was fine. And I noticed an odd sensation. The movie world seemed to end at the edges of the screen. I had no feeling that there was anything worth looking at in the rest of the movie's world.
Yeah, it's all just off-camera people. There's a mic guy, there's a boom guy, there's a bunch of people holding camera cables and lights, and there's nothing to see.
Stork, you're breaking the immersion, man.
I'm sorry.
Is your mic unmuted?
Well, it would be off.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Well, yeah.
There we go. That's better.
We want to hear what you have to say, man.
Well, to a certain extent. Right. No, put it back on. Contrast with this with Reign of Fire, which I just rewatched today because when I reread this email today, I'm like,
Matthew McConaughey.
Yeah,
all
that
tatted
one?
up and buff.
such a good movie.
With that axe at the end, it's like, okay. Yeah.
And it's like you see these dragons, like, oh, these things are really fucking dangerous. And then he's like, oh, wait. So you jump out of a helicopter and do he said with high altitude, low opening skydiving dragon hunting units. Yes, if you haven't seen that movie, it's
really unique.
Freaking cool.
Yes, I have a suspicion it's probably based on somebody's homebrewed game because it's so right in the role playing world.
What I love is them reenacting Star Wars for the kids.
Right.
In the movie.
I'm your father.
Oh, it was just great.
It's so good. It's kind of like Mad Max with dragons.
It's got star power. It's got Matthew McConaughey and it's got Christian Bale.
Bale.
Yeah. Now it was early though. So was Christian Bale big then?
Yeah.
No, he had just done Equilibrium.
Okay.
I think American Psycho had come out.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. All right. Contrast with Reign of Fire or Death's Gambit and Hollow Knight video games, where I get the distinct feeling that there's more out there. That there are other interesting people, locations, and situations in the world, and we're just looking at one of them. That kind of evocative depth is a major draw of RPGs to me. Do you guys have any thoughts about things we can do, concrete actions we can take as GMs to create that kind of depth? I'm sure a lot of it has to do with unanswered questions and tantalizing peeks at information. As the GM, can we see the facades on the buildings and the strings on the NPCs? As the GM, we can see the facades on the buildings and the strings on the NPCs. How can we gauge how effective the illusion is to the players? Thanks for everything you guys do, Joe and the Inland Empire. Nurse Columbus on the forum. P.S. Quaff the potion of your choice. I don't have anything to drink. I'll get something in a second. PPS, why are we still doing this? We're not still doing this, are we? Yes, we are. PSs are very valid here. Now, the first, when I read this, the first thing that came to my mind was Firefly. There's a ton of unanswered questions in Firefly, and that does make the setting seem big. Why do people cuss in Chinese? We know there must be something that happened there, and just there's a lot of things about that society that they don't ever answer. It's just there.
The first Star Wars movie had that in spades.
That's
Why is the Millennium Falcon
exactly
all
what I
beat
was
up?
gonna say,
Why is the armor all over? Why is this desert planet full of junk collectors? Why is there junk all over the desert? Why? There were all of these just hints and tantalizing things, but nothing was ever answered, and it just made sure that you just filled in this world.
There's just a shitload of aliens.
Yeah.
They're there, and deal. and yeah, but you're absolutely right. That's exactly the same example I was going to come up with was the original Star Wars film, where it basically unapologetically just dumped you into this incredibly alien and weird world without bothering to explain a gosh darn thing.
Well,
to you.
and then people say things so matter-of-factly, too. It's like somebody walks in and they don't look twice at an alien.
Right.
Or they would just say things like, oh, yeah, they did the Kessel Run. And, just matter-of-fact, oh, okay, yeah. Like, and
Oh,
then,
yeah, Kessel Run, yeah.
What the hell's that?
Right.
All of this stuff.
I'm going to touch it.
Yeah.
I got to do
What's a
0.5
power converter?
past
What's-
light speed. I was like, what's 0.5 past light speed? I don't even know what the hell that is.
Light speed and a half.
There you go. That's super fast.
C
What's,
times 1.5.
but what's a power converter, and what's and what's
Right.
Tashi Station,
Yeah.
and all of that stuff, just little hints,
Yeah.
little
Yeah.
drops that added.
Now,
As a kid, I was just
here to me, I think, is the challenge with this. Because yes, those unanswered questions and things like that are what sort of create the genuineness or the legitimateness of the world. All of the characters in that world know all that stuff and probably know all the backstory to it. Mm-hmm. Whereas if we're presenting a setting with a bunch of unanswered questions to players whose characters would know all this stuff, then the GM's going to spend a lot of time explaining all of this stuff and its significance. How can we avoid that? Or is there some other direction? Should we not be trying to emulate those kinds of things for role-playing games to get that sort of vastness and completeness of the world? You see what I'm saying?
I have lots of thoughts, and I actually, if you want me to start, I always like to start.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because he has all these media things, I immediately went towards. I didn't go towards all the detail and all these little hints and stuff. That's only part of it to me. Have you ever watched a movie without the sound, or ever watched it without music? It's boring.
No.
It's completely boring. What really works and builds up a movie or a television show is the music and the sound effects. All the atmosphere that you hear, the creaking of a cart down a road, the rain outside the window as they're talking quietly, the sound of the fire crackling, and then sometimes it's so evocative. There's just, people are drenched and cold, and the mud is splashing up on them, and you can almost smell and feel it. I think that dropping all of that atmosphere stuff in there helps to really sell your world to your players.
Yep.
Like, don't just have it in the golden hour all the time. Don't have it sunny. If it is sunny, make it. It's dusty and it's getting caught in your throat, and you smell dust. And when you walk into town, it's everybody's grumpy, and you can smell grime and the crush of humanity. Or it's pouring down rain and the mud is just cloying. It's sticking to your clothes, and it's just. All of that stuff, the sound of the fire crackling, the sound of the smell of the food as you walk into the inn, will help flesh out your world in a way that you can't just by throwing a bunch of sort of random details at them. I think it's a missed opportunity that a lot of GMs just don't do or think about. We just tend to get right onto the action. People say, what do I see? And it's like, well, wait a minute. You walk in, you can tell that the floorboards are very creaky because of there's hundreds of people that seem to come through here every day. You can smell grease from the kitchen. The tankards all look dented, and the tables are all patched. And all of a sudden you can hear the smell, or the fire is halfway down, and the logs are glowing warm, and all of a sudden people are transported into this area, into this world in a way that's like there's fire roaring, and the bartender is wiping a mug across the bar. Right. You throw in a few more details like that, and people are suddenly much more curious about what's going on.
Engagement of multiple senses.
Yes.
And description. But really, I think that there are three major elements when it comes to trying to project immersion. The first one is exposition. And that's the hardest one because, like I said, you don't want to belabor a game with a whole bunch of explanation about what things are.
No one
So
wants a 12-page data dump on my world. Right?
Exactly. Nobody wants to know exactly how this culture, this dwarven culture works and how their guilds interact with each
As
other.
much as it's fascinating to you, the GM, and as much work as you put into it, and you really want them to appreciate it, they're not.
And that's the landmine of it, because you as the GM, especially if you're the type of GM that loves world building, one of the things that you want to do is you want to share all this stuff that you created with people and you're excited about it. Your players may not necessarily be as excited.
Cool dwarven stuff
but
I came up with.
It's super awesome, right? So there is a certain level of subtlety that you have to have in your exposition, and you have to explain. You have to choose your fights where you go into what level of detail, because it has to be something that moves. Everything that you do as a GM should be something that moves the narrative forward, right? And if over-explaining something and it doesn't move the narrative forward just because you think it's neat, not necessarily something that's going to entertain your players.
Well, Eric Odd mentioned that exactly, and a lot of times players will ascribe a lot of importance to the things that you've described in detail because they must be important. The GM spent so much time describing it.
Exactly. So
So that
exactly.
that's inadvertently creating red
One that's literally one of the best ways to create a red herring, because people go, well, if the GM is going to spend 10 minutes explaining this to me, there's got to be something to it. Which it's not a logical thing to come up with. But secondly, it's and this one is actually relatively easy to do, and that's interaction. When you have players interact with your NPCs, and your NPCs have some liveliness, some uniqueness, some identity, and a role to play in the world that they're in, that adds a lot to the level of immersion in creating more detailed or fleshed out NPCs that they can interact with, because you can use those NPCs to very subtly, like I said, give you that kind of exposition as part of a conversation that you're having with somebody. Mm-hmm. It's something totally different to just dump a bunch of information. It's radically different to sit down with, your buddy over a tankard of beer, and he goes, "Oh yeah, man, I've been having some problems with my wife because she's part of this guild, and the way that it works, it kind of makes it hard for us to get together." Blah, blah, blah.
Right.
So now you've given that guild information that you wanted about the dwarves out, but you've done it in a way where it's part of another personality, and it's actual active role play that gives you that information. And the more that you have your players interact with what you have going on, instead of just simply absorbing it like a movie, the more you're taking the power of what a role-playing game does, which is create an interactive story, and you can get a lot of information, a lot of depth out of that. And lastly, the third thing is ambiance, and that's one of the things that Stork was really dead on balls about, adding some music, really sort of like giving people a feel of what the smells, the sounds, the tastes, and the feels of the place that they're in is like. And when you create those type of situations, people automatically sort of like move into the right mood and sort of understand where they are, and those type of things really inform what they're going to be doing as a player.
It's really easy to forget to talk about. We always just do sight. Sometimes you do sound, but it's really easy to forget about smell and taste. And smell is a really big one. And when I did the Fey Realm one, I talked about how, because it's supposed to be in autumn, it's the autumn Fey. When they get into the Fey Realm, they smell that smell of sort of wood smoke. Like when they used to burn fields and stuff. And it's this sort of pervading smell of like loamy forest and rotting leaves and wood smoke. Mm-hmm. And I think that casts a powerful spell. That's all I basically said, and it kind of informs the whole area right there. You're setting the scene, and that's what I wanted to continue on was, yes, I think, the GM needs to drive things forward, but I think it's also important to set the scene and allow that scene to be fleshed out and breathe a bit. You can't just dive right in. I think it's important to let people know kind of where they stay, like perhaps if they're at an inn, instead of them asking what happens, you say, you hear snippets of conversation.
Yeah.
And set the scene for them and give that opening acts or give the opening scene some moments to breathe and a chance to establish for the players what's going on, instead of just throwing them willy-nilly into it. They may do that anyway on their own.
Yeah.
Just dive right over and start hitting people. But I think it's a missed opportunity for the GM to help flesh out your own world that you spent so much time creating.
Yeah, I mean, and so you're what you're doing is you're creating a separate, more dimensions to the place when you add more descriptive elements, especially when it's just not just a visual sense. when there are a lot of times where I have a sound effects board that I have on my laptop that has like a crackling fire or the sound of rain on the outside, and you can just by playing something like that, that's just sort of like a little sound effect in the background, and sort of explaining to people what's going on and how everything looks. It sort of turns into a campfire story. At
Totally,
that point in time.
and I think it's really important to sort of just even touch on those a bit. Like, when you're sitting around the fire and you smell that wood smoke, or you hear the crackling, and if you have a crackling fire sound, everybody, it's a primal thing. We're back into camp. We're back in your grandfather's living room. You're back at Christmas time when you had a roaring fire. It's a simple little thing, but it can go a really long way to establishing a mood.
Well, a lot of times I think that people sort of lose sight that the location where players are where player characters are in can be as much of a characterization as anything else, and what you're doing every time you sort of like lay out a really good feel for a location, maybe it be a city or a town, wherever you're at, and people start really start getting an emotional connection to what that place is. When you're building that emotional connection, that's when you're actually building immersion, because immersion comes from you investing yourself into the storyline and becoming emotionally susceptible to whatever is going on there. So when you make somebody feel something, that's when you hook them. That's when you have them.
There's another thought that occurs to me as well. This is another sidetrack here, which is sometimes perhaps invert the tropes that we're all used to, right? Perhaps the elves aren't the nice people we think they are. Maybe they're slavers. Or maybe they are haughty gods that like to come in and play games with the humans, etc. Or maybe they are completely feral savages. You got to watch out for elves. It's fun now because now all of a sudden you've taken your world and made it unique and different, and then people are going to start looking at details differently. They're not just going to immediately walk in and say, "Oh, the elves are good and play music." Are they? Do they? How do you know this? It's a simple little trick, sometimes to just have the tropes that people think are there are gone. I mean, maybe elves aren't even there anymore, or maybe there's people that they think are elves, but they're actually just maybe they're dwarves, or maybe they're humans that pretend to be. It's funny and fun to mess around with that world that way, because it's not the people aren't going to know what to expect at any point now once you've changed your world up.
Right.
And you can still play that within the bounds of D&D. There's no reason that the elves can't be still elvish but have a whole different take. They don't have to be the good Tolkien elves that we're always used to. And now all of a sudden your players are much more invested in the world because they don't know what the hell is going to go on.
Eric from New Jersey, I think? Ed from MN. Ed from Minnesota.
Minnesota.
Right. He said elves were slavers in his world.
Yeah.
And it totally made the players think about it. Nobody liked it, but I made elves pricks, and they believed it. But I made sure to mention perfume, and players now think people who like perfume are slavers. There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's a very famous Shadowrun module where there's this stuff called amber gel, which is basically this thing that bug spirits are using to try to take people over. And the GM that ran that for us the first time did it he's totally shut down the lights. It was very creepy about that entire adventure. It was like insect based, so we were already kind of freaked out, and our emotional connection to amber gel now is so deep that it's become a trope within our own group of friends for something that's just scary as shit and you need to run away. So when you do it right, you're creating this deep emotional response when you really set the scene right. People really feel the emotion that you're trying to give off, whether it's fear, whether it's exhilaration, whatever it is that scene demands.
Right.
Some of the best video games and movies, that's what they achieve. You get caught up in the atmosphere and you get caught up in the world. I can think of like Dragon Age was so great with the stories and the worlds and the world building and the architecture and stuff that, like, I think that's sort of what he's alluding to here with the Gambit and Hollow Knight. You get so caught up in the visuals and so caught up in that world that it seems real to you. As a side note, there's kind of this weird thing that happens to me whenever I played a long MMO or a world for again, especially MMOs. I went back to EverQuest maybe a year or two ago, and I spent so much time in there and going around these places that it's a digital world. They're not real places, and yet I had like I felt like Patton walking through, like there was a great battle here once.
Right.
Oh yeah.
Oh wow, I remember dying over there, and oh wow, I used to hang out with I'm having these like emotional journeys in this completely totally digital world that isn't actually real. But
Right.
I remember that. I remember falling out of that tree when I was like level 2.
Oh, wait for the Oasis.
Oh gosh.
Master Vidar said, elves are happy woods folk who play music and dance. They also enjoy a nice roast human once in a
Right?
while.
See, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember
It's
when
the
I was,
only meat they eat.
I remember when I was watching Labyrinth, and she's like, "Oh, a fairy." He's like, "What do you want with fairies?" And she goes, "Oh, it bit me. What did you expect? It's a fairy. It's a fairy."
Freaking Labyrinth. I just watched that recently. But yeah, I mean, you're trying to evoke an emotional response. That's the point. And the more elements that you put in there to elicit that emotional response, the better off you are. Use more senses, use more description, have more interesting NPCs come up and give people information instead of just rattling it off. Create some ambiance, use some mood music, use your lighting. There are a lot of tricks that you can do.
Also, with your NPCs, show them living their lives and show them that their lives are not just sitting around with an exclamation point or a question mark over their head.
That's
Exactly.
a really good point.
You know what I mean? And like when you talk to some guy in a bar and he gave you some bit of information, and then you see him like having an argument with his wife at at his place of business or something, or just make them more than just.
When you walk up to an NPC, he's haggling over the price of something with a vendor. You're creating vivid situations where you can relate to them, so that there's something that you can immediately grab onto. And says, "Oh, I know what that's like. I know."
or
what that's
wonder about.
Or wonder
Why
about,
is it
yeah.
that guy seems so wealthy? Why is he haggling so much over that? Like,
like. You think wealthy people get wealthy?
And if you have trouble with this at first, you can do what actors do, which is you sort of base stuff on things you know. I remember I forget, was it Kimmy or you? We brought this up a couple of times where I think it was Kimmy when she was describing a high school, and at some point she realized she had to stop and draw the high school out because everybody was picturing their high school.
right.
And she may even have described her high school. It's like, oh, you're walking to high school, so she described what her high school looked like. And I think it can be a good tool for everybody. Describing how somebody sounds, or you imitate your uncle, or describing the interior of somebody's house. You can base it on your childhood home because you know
Right.
it really well.
And it's okay if people are envisioning things differently as
Yeah.
long as they're not coming into conflict. You know what I mean? And then a lot of times they don't. I mean, you can have a situation where you're describing. I talked about this in the old GM briefing once because I very rarely play. I almost always GM. And Kimmy was describing, or it was a D&D game she ran. Were you in that? I don't know. There was like 3 or 4 people played in that. It was like a one shot.
No.
She was describing. It was the first. I think it was the first time she GM'd, and she's describing how we're entering into the city, and it's like muddy, and it's like typical medieval city. There's the trough of crap down the middle of the street. Then she says it's like all festooned with like banners and there's tapestries up, and it's obviously they're getting ready for some sort of festival or something, right? So like immediately in my mind, as she's describing the situation, suddenly the streets got wider and they got cleaner. And she didn't say any of those things. It's just as she added more detail to it, it changed in my head what I envisioned I was seeing. And I think that I don't think you should shy away, even if it does create red herrings. I don't think you should shy away from not necessarily a complete and like painstakingly horrible description of something, but give enough detail so that everyone kind of starts to get on the same page. You know what I mean? And they will just naturally. I think our brains. That's the way they work. The more information you give them, other things change to accommodate the new things that the GM has described.
And if you get in the habit of doing that, sort of having every time they step into a building or setting a scene, they're going to stop looking for red herrings because now they know that that's part of your GMing style, which is to sort of set the scene at first with a lot of narrative and a lot of description.
Right.
And they'll stop maybe at first when there's like, okay, well, this all must be important. Well, after the 5th or 6th building you walk into and it's had this, you're going to be, oh, it's all just part of the style. Okay, got it. I'm going to stop looking for red herrings now.
Right. Now, they also mentioned scratch and sniff things. And I just did a search on Amazon, and there's there's a wine tasting scratch and sniff book. Now, I'm assuming that's like here's what jammy smells like, or here's what beets smell like, or something like that. But I also found there's a dope one too. There's a where was it? The Scratch and Sniff Book of Weed.
One of my favorite authors, like Moda said, spends a lot of time. Well, not a lot of time, but he usually, like, if somebody goes into a restaurant or sits down to eat, he'll describe what they're eating instead of just. It's not just Conan biting a haunch of meat. It's usually like some sort of game hen and cream sauce with a light ale, and suddenly you're like, I'm kind of hungry.
That's one of the things
really good.
One of the things. Well, when Tappy works on stuff, sometimes he'll actually detail out the type of food that they have in an area.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, if there are two crucial things about culture, language and food, if you get both of those down, you can really communicate a culture. Food is a very important thing because a lot of times when you're describing the food, and let's say you're doing like this, you're moving across a wide swath of land. You're moving like from the tropics up to a more cold area. You start off with a certain type of food in a certain type of way, and then when you get up to the north, none of the spices are there.
Right.
It's basically meats seasoned with the fats of other meats with a lot of salt. So, you can really sort of like put a whole new dimension thing when you start just describing the different foods.
You also get time of year, and you also get socioeconomic stuff as well. It's like if
Exactly.
you walk in an inn that's serving game hen with cream sauce, it's a much more upscale than the one that's serving root soup.
Yeah.
A thin root soup with
Right.
with watered down ale. Mm-hmm. But even those descriptions right there really almost set a scene. You're already like, yeah, it's like carrots and.
One of the things that I picked up from Fate, and one of the things that I use a lot when I'm running a game is that when I create a scene, as I'm thinking of the scene, I'll always write down in my notebook, and I don't use it for anything other than for myself, an aspect that describes that scene. So what I'm asking myself when I'm doing that, to condense what this scene is supposed to do in a sentence. And then I use that sort of as the kernel of everything that I build around in that
That's
scene.
a great acting exercise too. Did
Yeah.
you, from Summer Stock, did you pick that up? A little Meisner technique going on?
No, that's that was me just inferring that straight up from the Fate fractal, and I find that writing down just a straight thematic idea of what you want a scene, an NPC, anything to be, really, really helps you focus in on what you're trying to do thematically, and keeps you on track. And then and it's
talking
easier
about
to build
motivations.
motivations, which is the only real way to run a fluid game
Yeah.
is to just create NPCs and situations that have motivations and react with those instead of a straight up plot.
Right. There's also Llama Llama Yum Yum, a scratch and sniff book.
Just to let you know, I fucking hate llamas. I loathe them.
I don't know if there's
next
a-
time I see one, I'm going to punch it straight in the face.
Just make sure it's a llama and not a
Alpaca.
Or a guanaco. Those guys are assholes.
What are those?
They're another
Never-
form of llama.
Okay. Long-necked,
Yeah,
freakish
It's
mammal.
a Chilean version of that
Okay.
creature. Being from South America, I've been spit on by a few llamas. I hate those guys.
Camels
fuckers.
too.
They're dicks, man.
Camels are worse.
They're all over the place now, and my wife loves pointing out, look, a llama. I'm like, dude.
There's a
They
whole
have
llama
pet-
song.
They have llamas at petting zoo at fair too. Or are those alpacas?
I think they're alpacas.
I can never tell the difference. Well, alpacas are smaller, right?
Longer necks and
Alpacas are smaller and fluffier.
Okay.
The llama is the biggest one, and they're the pack animal.
they're all dromedaries.
They also had baby goats at fair last year. They were so cute.
Baby goats are so cute, little bouncy baby goats. But back on to role-playing
All
games.
right. All right. Well, thank you very much there for the email, Joe from the Inland Empire. Hey, what's going on with the con coming up?
You know what's going on with the con coming up? A lot of role-playing games. To the point where I think I've broken a record in the number of role-playing games
Yeah,
I actually have in my department.
Yeah!
And we're nearing like 120 games. And I still have a few to input from our special guests. So,
That's awesome.
That's up from, how long have you been doing this?
oh man, what, 2012 I think is when I started, something like that. No, 2010. So it's been 9 years.
10
since-
years,
19
and,
years that I've been doing this. And when I started, I had around maybe 85 events to 90 events. I'm at like 120 now, and that's not even counting the crapload of stuff that goes on on Games on Demand now.
Right.
And the fact that Adventurers League and Pathfinder Society have exploded in popularity over the last couple of years.
Have they really?
Yeah. Well, with the addition of with the new edition of Dungeons & Dragons, 5th edition actually really reinvigorated Adventurers League,
and you've got Pathfinder.
And we have Pathfinder 2,
Right.
but also the Pathfinder. Those guys really keep up on their product because they had Starfinder come out not too long ago.
That was a couple years ago. Yeah.
A couple of years ago. Now they have Pathfinder Second Edition, which actually has some really neat elements to it. They really did some fun stuff with that. We actually had somebody from PFS at Orcon this year, and I sat down with her for about a half hour when she talked about that. And now, also, since we've had a change of leadership in our LARPs department, we have like 21 LARPs.
21.
Wow.
John Wick's running 3.
What's he
Him-
running? 7th Sea?
He's running his professional wrestling LARP that he's been running around.
Awesome.
I'm really curious about this because
Right.
it sounds pretty cool. There was talk about him doing a vampire one,
I don't
and I
want to
think
see.
there's
I don't want to see nerds in tights, though.
Oh yeah.
Come on, it's like Jack Black's movie. What was that? The
Nacho Libre.
Nacho
Libre.
Nacho. Yeah. So if whether standing up or sitting down, if you want to pretend to be somebody else and make stuff up, it's a great convention to go to, especially now.
John Wick's a mad genius.
Yeah.
It'll be fun.
He's totally fun, and we have also his partner Ben Warner, who's testing a new Stone Age game where you play basically cavemen in the Stone
What a
Age.
great idea! How come that's never been done before?
Is it before a language evolved?
I'm not exactly sure. He's playtesting this bad boy, and you might just be a table of people going, ooh,
Great
gaga.
idea.
Right. Hitting
like-
each other over the head with foam bats.
Quest for Fire. Yeah.
Yeah, Quest for Fire, yeah. So Ben Warner, and we have somebody else that's... we have several RPG special guests. There's a lot of stuff going on. And if you're in the Southern California area at the end of the month, come over and check us out. And we also have a whole bunch of actual plays that you guys are doing on. I hear that you're doing a Cthulhu 7th that's actually involved with
Yes.
the Cthulhu game.
Yeah, it ties into the. I'm not exactly sure how yet. It may be. I may ask any surviving players from it to write down their sort of like a journal entry or something that
there
you
you
could
go.
find at some point.
Kimmy's running Decima. There's Kadave is running Tales from the Loop. A bunch of neat stuff. Dave Kazay is also running. I think. No, it's not
Let's
a town
get the
call.
new
Town
one,
Call
right?
Mal-
Not tech. I don't think he's running a town call malice for the AP. I think he's actually doing Bedlam Hall.
Bedlam Hall. That's
Yeah.
the one I was.
okay.
Victorian one.
So lots of things to see and hear. Lots of fun to be had, and there's not a cheaper time to be had. I mean, a day pass is like what, $30,
Right.
Something like
It's
that.
still, yeah.
And it's unlimited events, and it's 24 hours.
You still have to register for games, although there is a games on demand.
There is
for
games
those,
on demand.
For those that are late or don't want to commit, you can.
Not only that, but you can go in there and run something.
That's true.
Whatever you want to do, and Tomes runs that like clockwork. And if you have kids, there's also a kids games on demand, and we have several games going off in the family area now. We've been trying to get more GMs to run kids games, so we have.
Oh, you have a whole day in Games on Demand, isn't like
Sunday afternoon to early evening is entirely just for kids. And we also have on Saturday and Sunday from 9 to 8 a kids area upstairs on the second floor where we have all kinds of games and their own kids games library where you can just go in and borrow a game and play them with your kids.
I think Games on Demand is such a great idea. Can you briefly touch about how that works so that people because sometimes people might be shy
sure.
about how to do something
Well,
like that.
Games on Demand is a model that was recently made kind of popular in a lot of the major game conventions. And here's the way it works. We have an organizer, and what he does is he collects a bunch of GMs. These GMs have a whole bunch of games that they're willing to run. They're usually relatively small format, around 2 to 3 hour games. And they have a list of 2 to 3 games that they're willing to run. And what everybody does is they walk up, all the GMs have, this is what we have to offer. They have a brief little, these are the games, trying to sell them. And then everybody goes, I want to play this game. And the largest groups that want to play those games go to a table immediately and just start playing the game. So it's really just sort of like a walk-up, get random game. It's RPG pickup game.
Pickup group, yeah.
Exactly. So, and then that game goes off, and if you like what happened, you want to play another game, there's usually other games kicking off right then and there. Nothing runs on a set schedule. The whole thing is open from a certain time to a certain time. Depending on what's going on, you can get 3 or 4 games in, you can get 1 game in.
And that's where they was going that, which is really key. Like, if you have a full weekend, but you have 6-7 hours on Saturday, come on down.
Yeah.
Get in a games on demand game and get your game on.
One of the reasons I put it in there is because we had a situation where there were some failed games going on. There was some people not being able to get into the games that they wanted to get into, and I just wanted to give people an option for something to do if something happens where they can't get into what they need to get into, they can still find something fun to do.
And it's organized. It's not just a big cacophony down there where everybody's fighting.
It's not like open gaming where people are just like, my table,
right.
Take a hatchet to the face.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, that and we also have Artemis Bridge Simulator. If you like Star Trek, we have because it's not just role-playing games. We have board games, miniatures games, video games, seminars. Our own Jason Mills is actually going to be giving a seminar.
Oh, is it good? Awesome.
Right before your podcast on Saturday.
Right. Now, our live show is going to be in the same room we're gaming in, right?
Yep.
Yes.
You're going
Small venue, more
to fill
people.
the small room.
Pack the room. Rather have a packed small room than an empty big room.
And one of the things that I also want to point out that's
smellier too,
because I know that there are a lot of people that listen to the podcast that can't attend this convention, but that's one of the reasons why I encouraged you guys to do the APs at the con, so there are at least some games that you can actually watch and then listen to people talk about at the show on Saturday.
Right.
So there's a point of reference. So anybody can enjoy what's going on, especially with the Happy Jacks group at this convention. So, and that's pretty much all I want to say. I don't want to eat up too much time.
All right. Excellent. Next email. Am I a necromancer? From Nicholas. Who would like to read Nicholas's email?
I'll go ahead and read it.
From humble Sweden. He's a humble Swede.
From Niklas. Am I a necromancer? No. I summon thee, Jackers, elder dice god from across the pond. It is I, Niklas, the humble Swede, offering my email allegiance. My question is whether a profession/class is a lifestyle or simply a set of skills. I guess it's a game-specific question, but generally I consider the metagaming if a character thinks of another as a rogue, the paladin, or even the necromancer. Optional pause before story time. Okay, so story time. I played a low-level mage who strongly believed the dead should stay dead. Good plan. Through his efforts, he came to acquire a grimoire of necromancy. Its owner had recently passed away. I wonder how. And it would be ashamed to waste such a fine scripture.
Fine.
Yeah. He skimmed through it to see if it can be weaponized. Sure thing. A powerful and diverse set of skills, ranging from very useful to utter heresy. They come as a bundle, rules as written. He accepts the devil's bargain and learns that a surprise mechanic has been added: mild corpse rot.
Okay. He's got mild corpse rot.
Yeah. GM announces you are a necromancer now. Woo!
I get that when it's humid.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's eczema, man.
Baby powder.
Stay away from witch hunters, or you shall be soon set ablaze. True, mutation is no joke in the Empire, but these retorts kept coming up. You're a necromancer, Nicholas. I'd argue that manners maketh the man. No necromancy has been used, no dead raised. Yet I caught on. Players were less trusting, NPCs less friendly, even more so when the useful spells started to surface. Those were invisible ways of causing fear and damage. Not that edgy. A small thing to mail about, you might think. Well, here's the thing. We finally tracked down the next necromancer on our list. He had an undead bear charging us, and that's when that's where the necromancy finally would become really useful. I would quickly steal the control of the corpses before banishing them to oblivion, and I storked it. Here's where the group dynamic exploded from all the built-up pressure. A couple of underwhelming rolls, and I experienced my first ever PC death. PC death wasn't a thing until this day. the first one is always special.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think of it as a butterfly effect. The GM leading players on with meta knowledge.
The meta-knowledge thing it kind of goes into the whole tropes and stereotypes that I was talking about earlier. And I can certainly remember, it's like, once you figure out what somebody is, there's all of a sudden all these things you assign to them. Oh, he's a necromancer. He must be bad.
Right.
It's funny, my daughter and I...
Or he's a rogue. I want to make sure that my pouch is...
Pouch is always that.
Right.
And then people fall into the tropes. I'm a rogue. I'm going to steal everybody's stuff. It's like, why do you always have to do that? My daughter and I were talking the other day about why don't you make a necromancer that's like just is nice and wants to help people and reanimate their dead loved ones, or make little teddy bear golems because to entertain children.
You had a nice necromancer in the first Eldemy game.
I know,
Mandite. He was awesome.
But everybody thinks
he's just a little experimental. He's just a little curious.
You are dealing with dead things after all, but so are clerics too if you think about it. Yeah.
Really, what you're dealing
Fine
with
line.
here is prejudices.
Yeah.
Yes, you're right. Or preconceived notions.
Preconceived
Clerics
notions.
bring people back from the dead all the time too. So.
Yeah.
And I mean,
Hey, the spell type is necromancy. Look it up.
Yep.
very few people today, unless they have very specific occupations, consider their occupation to be their identity.
It's a dangerous thing. People still do that. They define them as their lives by
Doctors,
their-
lawyers, college professors, but a lot of people don't.
But the thing is, I think that's one of the things that sort of delineates a profession from a job, right?
Possibly, yeah.
When you're part of a profession, you're a mason, you're an actor, you're a sound designer. It's one of the things that's sort of like a core part of who you are because you put so much time and attention into it, and that's very much like a character class. Because when ultimately put it, when you're a fighter, you've basically been training for a very long time to be big, buff, and swing a sword. So that's got to be part of your identity and who you are, right? But I think that more what he's going into is I just picked up this book and read it, and I was foisted, and this prejudice against me was foisted upon me without me really understanding what the consequences of me picking up that book was.
Right.
I can understand where you're coming from with that, because if I didn't understand what the consequences of doing something as a player, and I made that decision for my character, and then I had to deal with those consequences afterwards, I might be a little bit miffed. Personally, I wouldn't, because I like to roll with that kind of stuff, but I can understand how somebody would be upset.
You could at least foreshadow that, though.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, I'm rereading Deadbeats right now, the Dresden Files book, and there's like 3 groups of necromancers who come into town because they're trying to find Kemmler's word. That whole thing. Yeah. And Dresden describes when he meets each of these necromancers that there's something about them that's different. But he also is using magical senses to sort of and he can, because Bob did the little experiment. Spoilers if you haven't read this book, it's 10 years old. Bob did that thing where he said, I want to know more about Kemmler and all that, and all of a sudden Bob changes and becomes like scary evil Bob.
Evil Bob, yeah.
And starts casting spells and shit, and like, this is necromantic magic. This is the magic of death. Come, young wizard. That whole thing, it just freaks you the shit out. But after that, once he's sort of had that taste of it, he suddenly recognizes it, and he can. And maybe there's, but I agree. You should have given the guy some kind of warning, whether it was in story or something.
Yeah. I mean, that would be the only thing I have about it, really. But when you play a half-orc, you have to be willing to deal with the consequences of playing a half-orc, especially if you know that the world already sort of has prejudice against orcs, and that's a problem. But to me, that's part of the fun of role-playing a half-orc, is you're dealing with the negative side of the social aspect of being a half-orc.
Right.
And, in the examples we had below, what if elves are cannibalistic to a certain extent, but yours isn't. He wants to go out and explore the world and be nice to people. Well, I'm vegan, but nobody understands it, and you're constantly being harassed because you're a baby eater.
Or even your half elf doesn't necessarily have to be a product of love, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Border wars happen, and awful things happen to people all the time, and so there's ways to subvert these tropes. I think you're right, because basically what happens is this whole party, pretty much once they hear what your class is, they assign a whole bunch of aspects to you,
right?
For lack of a better word.
Yeah. So, but that goes into the big argument about D&D and basically the fact that by its very nature, it creates identity separation between all these characters and automatically and tropes that you sort of are expected to follow through on in that character class.
Yeah. And to a certain extent, as Stu was sort of talking about, which is your identity is really wrapped up in what it is you do. And I think it's fair to say that people that study a long time to do something, I see it even in modern day that people have their identity is wrapped up in what they do. They are defined by how good they are at doing something, whether you're a musician, a soldier, an athlete. It can be a real big part of your identity, or all of it. I hear all stories about dancers who hurt themselves in something they don't know what to do with themselves anymore because their identity was so linked to dancing.
Yeah, but
maybe that's a different conversation.
It's a different conversation. The main thing about this situation is I see the value of surprising your players with unforeseen consequences. That can be interesting and that can be entertaining.
Yes.
But I think that I also solidly believe that RPG is a conversation, and I think that when you're going to do something like that very arbitrarily to their character, that is a little side conversation where you have, hey, I have this great idea about this necromancy book. How about we do this? As a player myself, I'd be excited to pursue that as a possibility.
Because this example sort of can be interpreted as taking away some player agency there.
Yeah.
It's like you've completely rewritten the character's class. Did the player have a choice? Did he have buy-in?
Right.
It's a little hard to tell, but yeah, it is kind of a dick move to just.
There should be at least some. It's like, well, even having the knowledge might change you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just giving him just that much, and go, no, I'm gonna read it anyway. Okay. You warned him.
Or basically go be wary of the form of magics that you delve into, for they will color your soul.
He does say they come as a bundle, rules as written. He accepts the devil's bargain and learns to a surprise mechanic has been added.
Yeah. But once again, first player death, your first cut is the deepest. But I think that all in all, at the end of this situation...
Oh, wait. Did he literally accept a devil's bargain? Because then he brought it on himself.
Yeah. But I'm sort of reading between the lines here in the fact that he accepted a devil's bargain as he knew he was doing something bad, but he didn't know exactly what the consequences were going to be of doing something bad. So the thing is, I think he knew he was stepping in some mud here, but
Might
it just
have also
didn't.
been munchkinning a little bit. He's
Could've
like,
been.
Yeah.
You know what? I'm not going to use this stuff because it's going to have bad consequences socially, but I'm just going to learn it all. So if I ever need to know it,
He says right here, I skimmed through to see if it could be weaponized.
right?
Sure thing, a powerful and diverse set of skills.
I'm just going to say this whole thing, lesson learned.
Yep.
Right. And
Careful what you ask for, you just might get it.
An email on a bunch of stuff from Tia Matinen.
Please read this email in mocking mimicry of the host, past or present, of the reader's choice. I'll read it as myself. Greetings, Comrade Stulin and his merry balalaika orchestra. It is I, Tiamatatanin. See, it's Tiamat.
Tia Matinen.
Tia Matinen, yeah.
Tia
From the mighty fjords of Norway. If that's too annoying, you could just admit defeat and refer to me as Matt.
Tia Matinen.
You know me as one of the Discord people that keep trying to seduce people into picking up miniature war games. I have some thoughts and questions I'd like to share if it's taking too long. Just yank out the points that you don't care for. 1. Blood for the Blood God.
Skulls for the Skull Throne.
I'm currently... That might actually be later on. I'm currently living with a reduced connection to Wi-Fi, so I've been listening to some of your older episodes. Back in season 4 or 5. Oh my god. 4 or 5. That's like almost 10 years ago. I kind of miss Bruce and Casey and Tyler at times. Stu made a comment to the effect, I don't know if I could run a Call of Cthulhu game. I don't think I could keep the suspense up.
And I can't.
Considering that there's now a Cthulhu game in the pipes, I want to ask, what's changed? Have you grown as a GM? If so, how? Has the pool of players gotten big enough that you could handpick players for it? Did the Elder Ones plant a seed in your mind which demands you share your madness? You want to just answer that?
The 7th edition came along and I liked it. And I'm just trying it to see. Don't try my hand at it.
Well,
we'll see.
You were snarky, but I mean, are you able to keep the suspense up?
Not so far.
I don't know.
Kinda.
I've felt suspenseful in that game.
That's because there's bugs. Everyone freaks out when it's like all insect shit. When I stumbled upon, totally accidentally too, I'm like,
You know what? Investigation games are really rough.
Yeah.
Because there's a fine line between giving your players enough where they feel like they're going in a direction and not giving them so much where they're just barreling through it.
Right, and then there's a lot of arguing amongst the players about what the clues actually mean. And so sometimes an entire episode can be taken up with people just discussing what it is they found and why it's important. So, yeah, investigation games can get rough, and the suspense goes away when people are busy trying to figure out what this means.
But simple fact is that I've never felt like I've been either tugged in one direction too hard where it pulled me out of the immersion, and I've never felt that I've been wandering aimlessly in a void because I haven't had enough input to go in one direction.
Right.
So as long as you pull that off in an investigation game, I'm fairly satisfied.
excellent.
My belief that the device of yes and is so frequently misinterpreted that it's not a useful tool within the hobby of role-playing games. Therefore, I'd like to swap it out with always consider it. It conveys the same general premise but doesn't contain the same possibility for misinterpretation.
Good luck changing terms in the role-playing game hobby.
Yeah.
Misinterpretation is part of the fun.
And
Yes.
I'm still partial to yes and because of it really did come from the theater improv stuff, and what you're doing is you're accepting what they want
And adding to it.
as opposed to I will consider it, which still makes you think
There's an ambivalence to it.
right, or that you may not actually accept it. You're just going to say
And you
no.
don't always, you don't always yes and. I mean,
You
there are
don't.
times it's like, no, that really kind of goes against like the main core concepts of the setting.
And that's a no,
Yeah.
but
Right.
but you still drive it forward. No,
an A.
but
Right.
you can do this instead. All right. 4. Death to the false emperor.
That's right, Death to the False Emperor.
5.
Thousand Suns, baby.
I don't even know what you guys are referencing.
Warhammer.
40K.
Right. In a recent episode, you mentioned a rough divide between what you called planners and panzers. Did you guys do that? I love that. Planners and
Panzers, I think was the term.
I like panzers myself because planners and panzers, guys that just go right through and
Yeah.
blow things up.
It's a blitzkrieg,
Right?
man.
It's a total blitzkrieg,
Yeah.
and people that just say, no, we've got to plan this.
I've been at the wrong end of that.
In fact, I'm
blitzkrieg,
making
yeah.
a whole game called Planners and Panzers.
I want to play that game.
It's about accountants in Nazi Germany.
There's the technicians
Fun
and
to charter an accountant.
Planners and Panzers. Somebody make a T-shirt. Okay, so Planners and Panzers, and I couldn't really think of an example of someone who's a planner. I think a good example of a planner is Chad of Fear of the Boot, or Angry GM, who I dearly wish could be on. Could have the time to appear on the podcast again. The unifying theme between them is that they start with a general idea of what the end of the campaign is, and then work backwards from there. Obviously, these two examples are incredibly different in other aspects, but they both set out with a goal in mind when they first draft their games. This seems to make a much more concentrated game and requires some heavier guidelines for what sort of PCs are acceptable. 6.
Now, let me just say,
Spells
like
for-
he did it for that.
Yeah.
For the Call of Cthulhu game, I'm totally a planner, as witnessed by. I almost always have an answer for you guys
Yeah.
when you start asking a
No,
question.
your game prep in that game is amazing.
It's extensive.
But I think you have to with a game like Call of Cthulhu. You have to have telegrams pre-made. You have to have that stuff.
I can make telegrams on the fly.
Well, okay.
I have a printer right there. It's wirelessly hooked up to the computer, and I have a PDF. I can just go. Tick, 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 tick. I'm getting faster at it.
You also have annoying players that are researching that time period like crazy and constantly coming up with new crap for you to deal with.
Right.
but I think any investigation has a lot of, I think, planning and prep to it, because you
Yes.
have to be able to, you have to lead them without them being fully led, and you have to give them enough clues that they can start piecing together.
And if they start, the whole thing is, I want to make sure that, like, if they find a certain piece of information, I try to anticipate what are the possible directions they could go,
Yeah.
and at least have some idea of what's going to be in those directions. Now they already have thrown in things where they've gone down avenues that I had not anticipated.
Yeah.
But for the most part, the stuff that they've done is stuff I've planned for them to do. Not in the order I planned it, but it all happened.
When Dave and I did Mission Imbartable, I planned out and set out a bunch of things and with clues, and I said, so if we drop this clue, what do you think the players might do? And we had to run through some possible scenarios so that we could have possible clues, or at least something that would come of it, or anticipate them. Oh, that's a bad clue. Oops, that's going to take them off the track. It does take a different muscle than just sort of yes-anding your way through a dungeon.
Right.
Actually, did a whole blog thing about this, and exactly that same sort of working backwards thing. But I only really do that when I'm doing a whodunit type of situation, where I go, this is the crime that was done, and then I go backwards from the crime being done and just go, this is how he did it.
Yeah.
And then what I do, and I borrowed this from Shadowrun, is that at every point where the villain or whoever perpetrated this does something active, I come up with 6 clues that are left behind from that action. And I randomly determine which one they find, and the 6th one is always something that they're going to find no matter what. But it's usually the most ambiguous clue.
Right.
So what you do is when you go backwards and you do that, and you literally have, they're going to find the situation where this happened. These are the things that are laying around for them to find. They could be different things. I don't always just go with one, and that sort of glosses over a failed perception check here or whatever. Right. But I always have the one obvious clue that's going to be there that may be a little bit harder to follow than the rest of them, but they're going to get it. I'm never going to have a situation where they flub all their perception rolls, do everything wrong, and never find the critical rule.
You can't do that. It's one of the major things I learned by doing this podcast was that. It's like, if you have I don't know why it occurred to me so late in life. It's like, if you have an investigation game, give them the freaking clues.
Right.
That's the whole point behind an investigation game. If you're just going to withhold clues from them, nobody's going to have any fun. You can't solve the mystery.
Right.
You have to give them the clues.
Call of Cthulhu. It's so important.
And people are so rigid. Well, you got to roll for perception to figure out the clues. No, give it to them.
Yeah.
They're going to have much more fun.
There's a certain point where you have to give them something.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what's the Pelgrane Press game? That you just give them. You just get the clues.
The gumshoe?
Gumshoe. And then also there's the Alexandrian.net had his rule for a scene is there's always 3 clues leading somewhere. Yeah. So even if they failed a roll or 2 rolls, there's still one thing they'll find.
And I hold on to that, the rule of 3, which is that there are these 3 clues and they will all lead somewhere.
Yeah.
Right.
I think it was an epiphany to me. It's like, of course, it's an investigation game. That's the goal. It's not about them maybe solving the mystery. It's about them putting the clues together and going on that journey.
Miss Marple never walked by a clue.
Nope.
Right.
That we know of.
Right.
That he knew of.
Yeah.
That'll be all for this time. Have a good one and drink
not
like
finished?
you mean it.
Oh, there it is.
P.S. Made you say Shaft.
Ah.
Watch your mouth. I'm just talking about Shaft.
I can dig it.
All right.
I hope we've been useful.
I think we have. I'm going to close this bitch out. Let's see. What do we got? There it is. You haven't heard this one?
And right now.
Oh, Happy Jack's RPG podcast, the show we love the most. With bad advice and humor crass from each and every host. And though the show won't start on time, the wait won't be in vain. For the host will drink and yammer on till no emails remain. Oh, Happy Jacks, our patron saint of the skillful game master. Oh, guide us well with yes ending to avert a disaster. Whether fate or GURPS or millions of apocalyptic acts, fellow listeners and every host will always have our backs. Unless you're playing D&D and then they'll give you crap.
Hey, you know what? I released a brand new collection of songs several weeks ago called, what did I call it? Crime, Betrayal, and Horror. And you can get that on pretty much any place you can get digital music. I'll play one of the songs from that right now. Nah, I play that one all the time. I'll play the other one.
We're out of time and out of space, lamenting for the torn, an apocalyptic nightmare born, and mankind better learn to cope with it fast. Watch the glittering protectors rise! Inhuman foes meet your demise! And boom, 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 your end is nigh. Another night, another fight. We battle by the glowing light of fallen foes in funeral pyres ablaze. No quarter shall we give our foe, and neither will they, and this we know, as kinetic flares flash upon our display. Watch the glittering protectors rise! Inhuman foes meet your demise! And boom, 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 your end is nigh.
The preceding program has been a presentation of the Angry Folk Media Empire.